In this session, we'll be looking at two important dimensions, one being the economic growth and the other one being the investment decision. What are the linkages, how economic growth is contributing to the investment decision, and even before that, what do we really mean by economic growth? All these things we would be taking up in this session. So whenever I use the word economic growth, sometimes some people interpret it as a GDP growth, or sometimes we even see based on the GDP per capita kind of a growth, right? So basically the most important thing, whether I interpret it as GDP or GDP per capita, the focus is more on growth, not on the absolute values of the GDP. So from that dimension, the first thing I need to understand is what could be the various factors which an economy should look at if at all that growth has to be occurring in that particular economy. The first and foremost thing starts with savings and investments. The more and more savings are there, that can create more capital into the economy. More saving of the people, it brings more capital into the economy, so more businesses can start up, more investments can come up, which can lead to more growth in the economy. So that is the kind of positive relationship or positive correlation that can exist between the savings and the growth. And basically the more and more domestic savings that are there, you don't need any other foreign investments for your growth. It looks like a lot of self-sustenance as the contribution to the growth. But it can still be possible that even if you don't have too much of domestic saving, I can get foreign investments and then still contribute towards the growth. So any kind of saving, first on the first priority, more saving can contribute to the growth. But at the same time, even if my savings are lesser, I can attract foreign capital. If I am able to attract foreign investments, even that can contribute to the growth of my country. Then, how well is the financial system in the country developed? Okay, I am able to attract capital, but how can I allocate the capital more and more efficiently? Right? It's just not the availability of the capital that is important. What is more important is how well I am able to allocate the capital towards the various businesses and productive investments. And that is where we look at efficient financial markets and intermediaries present in the system, because for different sets of people, based on their risk and return potentials, the financial markets get into the development of various innovative products which help in effective utilization of the capital that has been pulled out, and at the same time they even address, even if I am bringing in foreign funds or domestic fund, this financial system will take care of providing liquidity and enough risk management to the investors. And at the same time, the products like mutual funds or venture capital funds or any of these funds, they are majorly targeted towards pooling the capital from individual investors and then investing in them in a big way to generate the returns out of the major investments also. So even that is a kind of scenario that is typically created by the financial market. So the more established and the more innovative the financial system in the country is, the more it can contribute to the economic growth of the country. And at the same time, look at the political stability. The more and more that country is facing wars, corruption and any other such kind of political uncertainties, probably it's very difficult for those kind of countries to typically raise any kind of a capital. So the possibility of the growth in that country goes down drastically. Same way, if the legal system is not effective, it hampers the growth in the country. Property rights, both physical property, the land, how well are the land acquisition rights, how well is the property right in that particular country, and even the intellectual property rights, what is the kind of plagiarism that is there in that country, or at the same time what is the level of intellectual property protection that is available in that particular country. All these things can contribute towards the attraction of more and more capital. Let's assume that piracy is very heavy in a particular country. Probably attraction of the capital becomes more and more difficult in that country. Then, to what extent the country is investing in the human capital? When I say human capital, the education system in the country. More and more people getting higher education, more and more people getting professional education. So, to what extent the higher and the professional education in the country is improving? To what extent the health benefits or health system in the country is improving? All these things will tend to attract more and more capital, especially if more professional education is growing, more proportion of educated labor is increasing in the country drastically. That is a sign of attracting more and more capital as well as more and more industries into the country, which will contribute to the economic growth of that country. And what is the tax system? What are the regulatory burdens? If the tax system and all are much liberal, when the tax rates are not that intensive, there is a possibility of entrepreneurial growth in the country, which could cause new industries, new businesses to develop heavily, which could contribute to the economic growth. And finally, the free trade, to what extent the country is favorable towards free trade relationship with the other countries in terms of exports as well as imports, because that plays a major role in improving the efficiency and the reduction of costs, as well as it opens up the new markets also. And at the same time, when I look at unrestricted cash flows, even if domestic savings are not that great, foreign investments can come into the country, which can contribute to the growth. And as foreign investors, they can invest directly in India through FDI route, or in a domestic country through FDI route, or they can invest indirectly in the form of buying shares and bonds of the domestic country. Either of the way, they contribute towards the growth of the economy in a particular country. So all these things, the more the country is focusing on all these aspects, the more it can contribute to the growth of the economy. Now, is there any kind of a relationship between the economic growth and the stock market growth? So economic growth is what? Economy growth, we are simply saying, is on the same lines as the GDP growth, right? And GDP is nothing but sum total of the goods and services produced in the country. So which is nothing but the growth in the individual earnings of the various corporates. So the growth in the earnings of the various corporate is contributing to the economic growth, and in a way, because the corporate growth is growing, the stock market growth also happens. But what we need to understand in this process is, in the short run, the growth rate, the stock market can grow either at a higher rate than this GDP growth rate or at a lower rate than the GDP growth rate. In the short run, either of these things are possible. But what we are saying is, in the long run, the stock market growth rate should be same as the sustainable growth rate of the economy itself, because when you are looking at the company's earnings, which is measured through your net income to the GDP, net income growth relative to the GDP growth. In some cases, right now in a short run, probably this may be higher than this or this may be lower than this, but in the long run, when you are looking at, both of them should have to be the same itself, which means the growth relative to the GDP growth is zero, which means both of them should grow more or less at the same rate. The same logic holds true for the P by E growth also. In the long term, the P by E ratio should be the same for a particular company, which means because the earnings don't grow that drastically, the price also does not grow that drastically, which means the growth in price and the growth in earnings, both of them should be the same, which means the P by E growth is zero. P by E will be stable, P by E growth will be zero. This is one thing which we have to see with respect to the relationship between the stock market growth and the sustainable economic growth. Then the other important aspect that we should look at is the definition of potential GDP. When I want to define the potential GDP, basically because that is the one which helps an analyst to focus on equity valuation, because we take the long term GDP growth rate as an important element in the equity valuation process, especially to understand the terminal value. So potential GDP growth rate is majorly whatever the output that an economy can generate without any kind of upward increase in the prices. That is what we typically talk about as potential GDP. So which means when I am saying if the potential GDP is higher, means in the future the GDP growth rate is assumed to be higher. So from the people's dimension, they understand that their income in the future is going to increase compared to the current income. So in general they try to consume a lot and save less. So to attract them to save more and more, or to delay the consumption, what may very well increase is the interest rates. To promote them to save more and more, the interest rates have to increase so that it gives a kind of a benefit for them to get more returns, which will contribute them to the savings, which could again contribute to the growth of the economy. So the stock markets will increase, but at the same time the credit quality, the credit risk associated with the financial instrument decreases, which means the spread also decreases. So what we see is, in the short term, if at all the potential GDP tends to be higher, because the chances of inflation are not that high. Only when the actual GDP is higher than the potential GDP, we see that there is a potential for inflationary pressure. But if the actual GDP is lesser than the potential GDP, the chances of inflation are much lesser, which means even from the government's perspective, it can resort to expansionary monetary as well as fiscal policies to typically contribute towards the economic growth. Then, whenever we are talking about an economic growth, there are two major dimensions that we are looking at. One being the capital deepening, more and more increase in capital, right? So if we are looking at a country investing heavily in capital, that is what is capital deepening. So investing in capital also means the capital to labor ratio keeps increasing. So that is one mechanism. The other is invest in technology. So these are two major aspects that we are going to look at. An investment in capital and an investment in technology, because in some of the cases we generally see the final economic growth. Generally people talk about three dimensions of economic growth. One is the dimension of technology, then the capital, and then the labor. So labor part I will come slightly later, but I am looking at right now from a technology investment versus an investment in capital. In general, with these three dimensions, there is an equation also which is generally says y equal to k to the power of alpha into L to the power of 1 minus alpha. This equation is provided by Cobb-Douglas, called as a Cobb-Douglas production function, which talks about the based on the technological factor and how much proportion of the total GDP is allocated to capital as well as labor, total factor cost. We are talking about the economic growth. So this particular equation helps us in deciding the economic growth. So when I want to find out what is the output per worker, right, output per worker, which is Y by L. So when I want to know output per worker, so Y by L to the power of 1 minus alpha is Tk to the power of alpha. So I multiply the numerator and the denominator. So this is nothing but L by L power alpha. So I can very well write it as Y by L is equal to T into K by L to the power alpha. Alpha is the proportion of allocation towards the capital. So this is one way we talk about the labor productivity. So it can so happen that either by increasing the the capital per labor, by increasing the capital per labor, I can increase the total productivity per labor, and at the same time by increasing the technological advancement also I can increase the productivity per labor. So this is an equation which helps us in understanding to what extent the capital per worker will contribute towards the increase in the productivity. As the capital per worker is increasing, we see that the productivity per worker is also increasing, but at a diminishing rate. Based on this equation, I see that the productivity per worker also increases, or economic growth also increases, but at a diminishing kind of a rate. So if there is not much of a technology, it is seen that the only if I am increasing the capital without changing the technology, let's say the economic growth is coming more like this, if I even bring in the technology also, it may so happen that the economic growth is increasing at a much better pace compared to when there was not much of a technological improvement. And that gap is what is coming out as diminishing returns to the capital part. Now rephrasing that equation a little bit more, we were using the equation y equal to the T, technology, multiplied by k to the power of alpha, which is the investment in capital, and the labor, L to the power of 1 minus alpha. Now if I am taking a logarithm kind of stuff, log y is equal to log t plus alpha times log k plus 1 minus alpha times log L. Generally when I say log or delta, probably it is like log can be, in some cases we can write this log as nothing but the change delta y by y is equal to delta t by t plus alpha times delta k by k plus 1 minus alpha times delta L by L, which means the growth in the potential GDP, this is growth in the potential GDP, the growth in the potential GDP is equal to growth in technology plus alpha times the growth in capital plus 1 minus alpha times the growth in the labor. So using the same Cobb-Douglas equation, just by pulling out the deltas out of it, we are able to bring out this kind of a relationship as to how do I get into the forecasting of the potential GDP. The same thing, it gets out like, okay, in this, when I am talking about labor, growth in the labor, so labor could be measured in terms of labor hours. Okay, by what extent did the labor hours actually increase? So whenever we talk about the labor hours, we may look at the population in year 1 and year 2, labor force participation, how much of this population is really working, and multiplied by average hours per worker. So all these things is what is the total labor hours of that particular country. The increase in the labor hours is typically going as a part of the long-term growth rate in labor. So using these three growth components, one is the technology growth, then the capital, the growth in the physical capital, and then the growth in the labor. So some kind of a weightage is given to the capital growth and some weightage to the labor growth, contributing to the total growth in the potential GDP. So the other way of talking about the growth of potential GDP is translate everything into the form of labor with the inclusion of the technology aspect. With the inclusion of the technology aspect, we are looking at the growth rate as the long-term growth of the labor force, which is the population and to what extent the labor has increased and to what extent the labor productivity has increased. So look at it purely from a labor standpoint. I can very well say, the growth is primarily because of the increase in manpower and the productivity of the manpower. So these two things put together is what is contributing to the growth. The productivity of the manpower is again coming from the usage of technology, the usage of investment in capital. All these things are in a way contributing to the productivity of the labor. So this is also another way of defining projecting the potential GDP of the economy. Now, the other dimension that we should look at here is a country which is having natural resources. So, any of the natural resources, it could include some kind of renewable resources or even non-renewable resources like your oil and gas. So any of the natural resources whatever are there, that will definitely contribute to the economic growth, because some countries which have very abundant natural resources, they have grown drastically. But even if countries did not have natural resources, did not possess the natural resources, through the acquisitions, through trade, they were able to grow quite drastically. We see various countries like Japan growing at a phenomenal rate, though they don't have the ownership of any of the major natural resources. Through proper trade and acquisitions, they were able to grow quite drastically. And another important thing in this context to understand is the ownership of natural resources. See, we were making a statement that when a country possesses a lot of natural resources, it can lead them to a strong economic growth. On this, there is a concept called a Dutch disease. What it says is, a country with so many natural resources, with heavy tons of natural resources, what it finds is, it is exporting these natural resources to a large number of countries, and it finds that it is getting a lot of hold because of that particular natural resources, and its currency is appreciating quite faster when comparison with by utilizing those natural resources and probably exporting those resources to outside countries. It is finding that its business is growing quite tremendously, and it is able to create a heavy market through the foreign demand for those natural resources. But because of that, it is neglecting the other industries quite drastically, and that is resulting in the other industries, other domestic industries in that particular country, they are not able to compete globally at all. So it is losing out very badly on the other industries, because from the company's standpoint, it is devoting a disproportionate amount of its economic energy towards that particular natural resources industry, and it is not allowing the other industries to grow. So sometimes the Dutch disease mechanism, what it says is, even if you have abundant natural resources, sometimes that itself could be a deterrent to the growth of the economy. That's a very important dimension that has been brought up. So from an analysis standpoint, we need to be careful in terms of understanding that specific aspect also. Now, looking at the labor as a dimension, we have to look at what are the factors that can help in the growth of the labor from a labor dimension, which could contribute to the economic growth. So from that perspective, we use a definition called a labor force. Generally, the people who are available to work, who are employed and who are unemployed, from the perspective, they are willing to work but they are not able to get the job. So this labor force in a country itself is defined from multiple dimensions. What is the rate at which the population is growing? Right? In some countries, if there is no population growth, probably what we see is the growth may not be that comfortable, or probably the composition of the population. If many old people are there in the population and very less number of youngsters, even the growth may not be that heavy for those kind of countries. And sometimes even fertility rates, all these things have some kind of impact on the economic output. So population and the growth of the population is one of the determinant factors that will contribute to the economic growth of the country. Not just the population, to what extent this population is participating in the employment activity. So which we look at it as labor force divided by the total population of the working age. Generally, working age is treated as, let's say, 16 to 64 years. Country wise, the working age will typically differ. So what proportion of the people are either employed or unemployed? When I use the word unemployed, they are willing to work but they are not able to get the work. That is what goes as unemployed. Not that people who are not interested to work, we don't categorize them as unemployed. So to what extent or what is the percentage of participation of these people in the work of the country, and at the same time what proportion of the people are coming from other countries, to what extent the country has a potential for immigration, people coming and settling down from other countries into this particular country. So the more and more that is happening, it can result in more and more growth. But if immigration is also not happening, then again the growth in that country is getting hampered. Similarly, average age group, right? If more of youngsters are there in the population, probably the growth is going to be much more compared to a large proportion of old people in the population. And one more aspect that needs to be looked at is average hours worked. In some countries, we see that the average hours per employee go up quite drastically. People spend long hours in a day at work compared to people in other countries. So average hours worked for people will be different across different countries. So when I look at all these factors, that is what will contribute to the growth in labor. Right, because in some countries there could be some kind of legislation also in terms of how many hours the people should work, some kind of unions, all these things will come into picture, which could result in it forming a key factor in terms of the contribution to the economic growth. Then the other dimension which we need to see is the investment. When we are saying there are two different forms of investment, any capital that we are trying to look at, we are looking at physical capital versus intellectual capital. When I am looking at human capital, it is more in terms of the intellectual capital. So when we are looking at regular labor related, probably we will talk about hours of work and labor hours and these kind of scenarios which we have looked at earlier. I would have looked at the population growth and all that stuff. Whereas when we are talking about human capital, it can't be quantified in numbers so easily. It's more of a qualitative measure. What is the worth? What is the kind of skills, education, experience that this capital, that this human capital is bringing to the industry? So the technological development as well as human capital investment, these are the two great areas that will definitely contribute to the economic growth. Basically in the areas of information, infrastructure, technology, all these kind of aspects, they contribute very significantly to the economic growth. So the companies spending very heavily on the research and development activities, even they are contributing very heavily to the economic growth, because this is something which can add to more and more new products, new innovations coming into the market, which could form a key driver towards the growth of the economy. Even an investment heavily in public infrastructure, right? Nowadays we see public-private partnerships. Means the government is trying to invest very heavily in the public infrastructure through a private partnership kind of a model, so that it can handle large number of projects in a quick short time, which could give both a benefit to the government as well as the private enterprises, and thus contribute to the welfare of the society quite comfortably. Now, the most important aspect in this session is the three major theories of growth that we should look at. It all started with a classical growth theory, which was an outshoot of the Malthusian economics, which is more related to the population. What it says is, if at all in a country the GDP is growing, whether it is GDP or GDP per capita, per participant, per population, if in any country this GDP is growing, it is observed that it will result in population explosion. This classical growth theory says the GDP per capita, there is a long run subsistence level which is more like, this is the threshold kind of a level. So whenever in any short term we see that the GDP per capita is greater than the subsistence level, this is generally looked at from the perspective of, if I have to lead a decent life, a comfortable decent life, what should be the GDP per person? That is what is the subsistence level. And if at all I am seeing that the GDP per capita is much greater than the subsistence level, that itself will result in a population explosion. Huge population will come up either through more and more births, or it could be more through immigration. There is a lot of huge population explosion, and because of that the GDP per capita is again back to the subsistence level itself. So which means the long term growth in the per capita income is not going to be that heavily possible. That is what is the classical growth theory. So the GDP, real growth rate of the GDP is only temporary, because the population explosion is going to happen, and because of that huge increase in the population, the GDP per capita is again back to normal. Whereas when it comes to the next theory, which is a neoclassical theory, it is going with a concept of long term steady growth rate of the economy. What it is saying is that steady stable growth is purely based on how the population is growing, right? The long term growth is purely based on how the population is growing, what is the labor share of income to the growth of the economy, and how the technology is growing. And very important statement with respect to neoclassical theory is, it always assumes that the returns to capital are always on a diminishing basis, which means whatever the growth that is coming, especially through the savings and all, is completely temporary. Because whenever you are investing, see the way it interprets is, if at all, if you are increasing the capital, that increased capital will increase the output, but it will not increase the growth rate. The output will increase for this particular period, but the growth rate will not increase, because in temporary it is saying the growth rate will increase, but if there is no technology progress, whatever may be the capital you are investing in, the growth will not increase. That's an important statement of the neoclassical theory. When the output to capital ratio is constant, both the labor to capital as well as output per capita grow at the same rate. What it says is, in the long run, the output to the capital ratio will still remain constant. Only in the short run it may be increasing, but it has to come back to normal if there is no technological advancement. That is one of the key statements that is given by the neoclassical theory. So which means if there is no technological, to just summarize it, if there is no technological advancement, whatever the capital you are inputting into the system, it may result in an economic growth in a temporary way, but it cannot be a long-term way of sustaining the economic growth. Whereas you have the third theory, which is the endogenous growth theory, which says even a capital can have constant returns. It will not have diminishing returns. An investment in the capital can have constant returns. And when it is saying the investment in capital, it is more referring to R&D kind of investment. So more of research and development investment will result obviously in a technological advancement and in turn into a growth, which means what it has brought out earlier is technological advancement will result to a growth as per neoclassical, but capital investment need not result in a growth. But what the endogenous growth theory is saying is capital investment in research and development will definitely result in technological advancement, which in turn will result in growth. So even if you are able to save more and more, this is one more statement which is a difference between these two theories. What the neoclassical was saying is savings, whatever the growth that a country is trying to derive out of the savings, that growth is completely temporary. Whereas what the endogenous theory is saying is that growth, even whatever the growth that is derived out of the savings, that can be constant and consistent. It can result in a growth in a constant and consistent manner. So whenever we are talking about the growth rate in the standard of living, it is because of technology growth as well as the capital deepening. Both of them can very much result or can very much contribute very significantly to the growth in the standard of living. And one major dimension that they have brought out is knowledge capital, which is obtained either through the R&D process or more and more trainings or more education, all these things. If I am building the knowledge capital drastically, that investment in capital cannot result in diminishing returns. It can result in constant or increasing returns over a period. So these are the three dimensions of the various growth theories that are available. And what we see is the classical growth theory was simply saying that the GDP growth rate is temporary, whereas when it comes to endogenous growth theory, it is directly making a statement with the investment in capital and technology. Obviously, there is going to be a very constant and continuous increase in the growth rate for a country's economic development. One more dimension now. We call it as convergence hypothesis, especially where we are looking at. Right now we see there are a lot of differences between a developing country or probably a less developed country and a highly developed country. So when will the standard of living is completely different between an underdeveloped or growing kind of a country versus a highly developed country. So regarding that, is there any way the standard of living of these underdeveloped countries will equal, if not surpass, the standard of living of the developed countries? So from that dimension, we are making three kinds of hypotheses, wherein an absolute hypothesis says over time, nothing much, the standard of living of underdeveloped countries will converge to that of highly developed countries over time. That's it. That's an absolute convergence. All the countries are going to converge in the long run. So the standard of living of all these countries is going to converge in the long run. That is what is an absolute. Whereas when we are saying a conditional convergence kind of stuff, what it says is yes, convergence will happen, but only for countries which have the same rate of savings, the same population growth and the same production function as that of developed countries. So if the developing countries are maintaining these kind of numbers consistently, the growth will be continuous and that growth will slowly approach the standard of living of the highly developed kind of countries. So initial stages there would be a high growth rate, and once they try to meet the standard of living of the developed countries, it would be more or less in line with their growth rates. So this is what the conditional convergence hypothesis is. Yes, the standard of livings can definitely match only if the savings rate in that country, the population growth in the country and the production functions match to that of the developed countries. Whereas the other hypothesis regarding the convergence of the standard of living is the club convergence hypothesis, which says yes, they can still converge, in case that those countries fall into the same club. So again, when we are saying club, it could be the countries having the similar levels of political stability, similar levels of property rights, or adherence to some kind of standards. They are all treated as a part of a club. Some kind of similar institutional structures and features, if they are having, then slowly their standard of living can converge to that of a developed country. But without having all these kind of things, it cannot happen that over time the standard of livings of the underdeveloped and the developed countries will converge. That cannot be the possibility. And this kind of association with the club and all those things are definitely an incentive for the developing countries, but may not be anything for the developed countries. Now, what we typically see is R&D, generally done by mostly a large private sector organizations. Let's say pharmacy, a lot of pharmaceutical companies, they have a big R&D department, right? Then if I look at information technology companies, there is a big R&D department. So R&D is done largely by the private firms. But what we see is, once the R&D is successful, it contributes heavily to the growth of the economy. So even to the public, the R&D forms a very important benefit. R&D done by the private firm actually forms an important model for the growth of the economy. So what we see is, a private firm is purely from a business motive, and at the same time it is contributing to the growth of the economy. Whereas if I look at it from a monetary perspective, the private sector's benefit is less than the optimal, because they are contributing to a larger portion of the society, but at the same time their economic benefit is not that optimal, because they are providing something to the society which a government is supposed to perform. So that is one of the key reasons. What we see is, if the government is going to give more and more subsidies on the R&D investments, we see the private investing quite comfortably in the R&D, because if the government is not giving any kind of subsidies, we find that the private may not invest heavily in that, because it's not going to contribute heavily to their economic benefit. So that is where we see the especially for major private initiatives in research and development, we see government grants and subsidies coming up, because in typical, whatever the R&D the private sector is doing, though it is for their own advantage, but in a way it is benefiting the society also in large, which means there is some kind of a government responsibility also involved in it. So from a government's perspective, they look at giving some kind of subsidies for the same. And one more dimension that is worth looking at is a country which is removing the trade barriers, allowing a lot of foreign direct investments or indirect investments coming in. That will contribute very heavily to the economic growth. It is helping and taking a great advantage of the innovation aspects in the country, and standard of living convergence of the standard of living is going to be quite effective. All these things will definitely contribute very heavily to the GDP growth of the country. So that is what we should understand as a part of this session on economic growth. And from an analyst dimension, the focus on economic growth is definitely required to understand all these aspects. I hope I am clear in terms of explaining you the basic intention behind the economic growth and the investment decision. If you have any further queries regarding the same, you can get back to me by giving me a call on the number given below, or you can even send an email at vamsidhar@pacegurus.com. Thanks a lot for listening to this session. Thank you very much.